Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to another episode of the New Fashion Conservatives podcast. As always, I'm your host, Justin Phillips, and with me is the one and only
Shadow Governor Voss, Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
And today we're talking about the Marquette Law Poll, talking about Mark Pocan making an ass of himself, and of course we got some candy for you. So let's get into it. Shadow Gov. Marquette University Law Poll just released recently. Let's talk about some of the takeaways. Now, I know Dan Schaefer, our favorite recombobulation columnist, tried to make a case on why the poll was good for the left. And here we are. We're going to be out here telling you why the conservatives should be emboldened by what they're seeing in this poll.
Well, again, I think the Marquette Law Poll usually does a pretty decent job. And in recent years, they would miss on the presidential, but they would be like spot on for governor races.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that their national poll was pretty spot on. But then again, it's really hard to poll Wisconsin just because of our demographics and, you know, the rural and urban disparities. And additionally, it just seems like every national poll is really close.
But I did see a lot of stuff in here that I think center-right policies are winning. Now, even if the conservative candidates aren't winning, I think you see a lot of support for policies that would be traditionally considered on the Republican side.
Yeah, I think that in just basic, I just wanted to start real quick with something that hasn't really changed a whole lot, which Tony Evers' approval rating, 48%. Disapproving was 46%, so he's above water. But his job approval has remained at close to 50% throughout his time at governor. So This is basically hasn't moved at all. You know, regardless of how many times the Republicans have hit him, he's basically remained a consistently, I don't want to say a popular, but certainly he hasn't been unpopular, it seems like.
Yeah. Credit to, of course, the Wisconsin Republicans in the legislature for passing good budgets that give him some wins, I suppose.
Well, that's kind of the problem with divided government is, well, do you just want to be hacks and not give anything, or would you like to get some wins? You know, and Republicans do promise that they want to get tax cuts. So how do you get tax cuts with a Democrat governor? You got to do some wheeling and dealing.
But let's be clear, though, when you peel back that onion on Evers' approval rating, it's very high with Democrats, obviously. 91% approve. And, of course, the disapproval amongst Republicans very high at 86%. But here's the interesting one is independents are slightly more disapproving at 45 than approving at 43.
Yeah, which I'm not surprised that independents are split, per se. But it is an interesting tidbit. But I think one of the most interesting and one that Republican online influencers were quick to glom on was 42% of Wisconsin voters say they would like Evers to seek a third term as governor. Well, I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination, but 42% would indicate that you were below 50. And in 2026, for the 2026 election, while 55% do not want him to run again, 83% of Democrats, 37% of independents, and 7% of Republicans want him to run again. So I don't know who they're polling as Republicans that want Evers to run again, but apparently Marquette Law Polls has a 7% sample size of Republicans that want him to run again. But still, over half the electorate doesn't want him to run again. So I thought that was extremely interesting based off of the whole narrative that I know that we have this cloud of what's going to happen of uncertainty that's been kind of above Evers' head. And is this another point in the Dan Schaefer column of to turn over the tide to the next generation, or to do this too long and be, potentially become another Biden?
Yeah, how many Helen Roy's supporters were in that poll saying no, he shouldn't run again?
Well, I do have to give Eric Brooks credit for his little meme that he posted about this specific data point where he said Kelda Royce supporters smashing the button, and it was just a gif of the seniors at the casino just pressing the spin button continuously. So I would not be surprised if they rigged that poll. No, just kidding, of course. But
no, I was going to say, going on, favorability of political figures and organizations. The MAGA movement's at 43% favorable. Black Lives Matter movement at 37% favorable. So both of those are underwater, but that doesn't really surprise me. I think both of them have...
I'm surprised Black Lives Matter is even that high, to be honest.
Both of them have some significant negatives, I think, just in policy or just in press. The Black Lives Matter movement, of course, being known for a money laundering scheme for their executives.
Which has basically died out since its existence.
Yeah.
Which is why I was saying like 37%.
I wonder if that's just a thing that they had to think of the other side of the MAGA coin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else you would say. There's not really necessarily like a
there's no
galvanizing group that you could put them in, because it is kind of hard to find a label for the Democrats that they could all ascribe to other than the pride flag.
Right.
They should have done that.
Or the Gaza, but there's no there's queers for Gaza or queers for Palestine, but
there's another name that they say as well that's a little bit more unsavory as well.
And that is
fags for Palestine.
I thought you meant the poll. Oh my gosh!
No.
I thought you meant a poll character that was more unfavorable. Oh my goodness!
Hey, that's what they say. I'm just using the name that they have ascribed to themselves.
If that's the case,
just saying. But
yeah, I think it's just the yin to the MAGA yang. But when you look at policy coming out of these, 58% of Wisconsinites say that schools have set their education standards too low and they should be higher. Not surprising.
No, not surprising at all. And we've been talking about this. Well, we haven't been talking about this, but I know that Republicans have been talking. This was a huge talking point during the DPI race where our illustrious DPI superintendent, who's an absolute abomination, so much so that Tony Evers doesn't even like her. And there's even rumors that Tony Evers was the one who potentially recruited the person, not the eventual quote-unquote Republican nominee, but the Jeff Wright, I believe, was the other Democrat in the race that didn't make it through the primary. So I am not surprised that Jill Underly might be the reason that public schools in Wisconsin are going to be in a world of hurt, potentially if there's a Republican governor, because she's ruined all of their credibility.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's why I think 48% of Wisconsinites think schools should have higher education standards. 57% say that property taxes are more important than increasing school funding.
What was that again?
58% say property taxes are more important than raising or increasing school funding.
I would love to telegraph that to Democrats who, and I know for our last episode, we were just talking about the 400-year veto, and the one thing that people don't realize about the 400-year veto is that it doesn't automatically increase your property taxes. It just allows Democrats to increase, but they have to do it via referendum.
Mm-hmm.
So the one complaint the Democrats had is, well, we have the 400-year veto, but that means we still have to raise taxes on people to get that money. Well, of course you have to. So according to this poll, that's not exactly a popular position. Go figure. Democrats holding an unpopular position.
Yeah, I wonder if that's referendum fatigue. I think more and more you see school districts going to referendum and them not passing, at least on the first try, second try.
I still think I still think a majority of them still pass, though. I don't know I don't remember the exact percentage. I think the Journal Sentinel actually reported on this, that it was over 60%,
Sure.
I think. But
I think it's more of a story that some are actually not passing when we
true.
come from a time when they were
don't you remember, the referendums would overwhelm, dictator margins.
Yep.
Where it would support. And, I know that the MPS referendum was only, last year? And I think that barely passed 50%. It barely got over the finish line.
Yep.
MPS, the bastion of raising taxes on their
and lowering standards.
And lowering standards. It's the the pinnacle of that. So very surprising, but well, actually not surprising that people don't want their property taxes.
But what I found a little bit more interesting is 63% are very or somewhat satisfied with the job public schools are doing. And while 38% are very or somewhat dissatisfied. And I think that comes down to the fact that we haven't, in the state of Wisconsin, seen the hyper woke leftists in the schools, in the curriculums, the way that, libs of TikTok or gays against groomers have reported in some of the other states.
I also think that there is a heavy dose of I don't want to say, it's not, the word's not recency bias, but it's, for example, it's kind of like Congress is a problem, but my congressman is good.
Yeah, yep.
Schools have issues, but my school district is good. Which I think there are plenty, and I know that the libs are probably, oh, you guys hate public schools. It's like, there are plenty of good public schools that, teach kids the ABCs and math and history, and don't teach all the blue-haired crap in schools. But it is out there. I do think that there is a lot of, I don't think people realize that there's stuff going on inside their district until it's happening.
Yep. Until there's a school board meeting where the school board is,
and it comes out.
Yep.
And I think that's a condemnation also on citizens for maybe not being activated enough.
No, but you got to tip the hat to organizations like WisRed, like 1848 Project, who are recruiting conservative leading candidates for school boards that I think are doing a better job either stopping or shining a light on those woke policies that are in there. So I think maybe this is just a function of more conservatives being elected to school districts that are in conservative communities.
And I think that, I also think that there is a thing to be said where Wisconsin has a lot of school districts. They're just broken down to a very granular level. And so it can be more localized where, some of these smaller school districts, you might know that your local school district doesn't have any of the woke crap in it. So, you have no problems. So I'm not surprised by that.
But speaking of the 400-year veto, it should come as no surprise that a large majority of Republicans at 83% say that governors have too much partial veto power, as do 56% of independents.
Which, a great issue for Republicans to hammer that. The only problem is now I'm probably going to need some help with this one, but wasn't there a constitutional amendment to amend the line item veto authority of the governor, and it failed?
That was the Frankenstein veto.
That was the lawsuit, I think, and then they changed that so they couldn't do the Frankenstein veto. But I thought there was a constitutional amendment that was seeking to actually rein it in from the constitutional lens. I think the Frankenstein veto went to the Supreme Court, and then they ruled that he couldn't veto letters to create new words, essentially. And then the Frankenstein or the Vanna White veto, wherever you want to call it. I think that's what that was from, but I could also be wrong. So I'd be curious to see if rating in the line item veto authority via constitutional amendment would be viable with those poll numbers.
Sure. Well, it's something we're going to have to break down once the Wisconsin Supreme Court finishes its session and releases all of its opinion. But they did rule against the Democrat governors in fight over veto powers just recently.
Okay. Yeah, well, there was the case regarding the literacy funding.
Yeah.
That veto funding. But that was line item veto funding, because Governor Evers was line item vetoing a bill that did not have appropriations in it. So it's slightly different, very niche, will require, again, its own episode. But really quickly, speaking of the Supreme Court, why do we poll approvals of the Supreme Court? Is that to me? I think it's dumb. Why do we? Isn't it supposed to be nonpartisan? Isn't that the whole point?
Yeah.
Why are we polling the approval rating of the court then? Does that seem weird to you? It's always seemed weird to me that, well, of course, when the liberals are in control, the liberals are going to like it, and vice versa.
And then
So why do we do this? I don't really understand
That one seems like it was just trying to pad out the questions.
I mean, I guess that's fair.
I don't see it. I just know that 73% of Republicans favor changing to partisan Supreme Court elections, while 58% of Democrats prefer keeping the current nonpartisan elections. Independents, 54% for partisan elections, 46% nonpartisan elections. And I think that's just a function of the Democrats winning more races. I think if Jennifer Doro had won 2 years ago and Brad Schimmel had won just 2 months ago, 3 months ago, you would have seen those numbers flip.
Yeah. I could totally see that happening. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to say that the Supreme Court approval rating of 49% with disapproval at 38. And they said this is the strongest net approval of the court in 7 Marquette polls taken since October 2023. So they only recently started taking the approval of the court. And for the people that want to keep the courts, quote unquote, nonpartisan, I feel like polling their approval is just not the way to do it, personally.
And I wonder what the approval rating would be after they find out that 3 cases that struck down some of Tony Evers' powers or the redistricting case.
Oh, yeah.
9-0.
Well, they asked all these questions before some of these cases have come out. That would be interesting, but again, I don't. We'll see how high profile these cases get. I don't know if the general electorate would even understand that these cases are going down.
Right, but that's why you're going to tune into a future episode of the New Fashion Conservatives podcast where we break down those cases for you.
We might have to do it in like 2 episodes.
I'm sure we will. It's going to be a lot.
It's going to be a lot
to talk about. We're going to need some legalese, some legal help from that.
I'm not a lawyer.
We've got some people on there.
I am not a lawyer. I am not great with that stuff. I know enough to be dangerous, and that's about it.
Yep. But for UW funding, this is another one that stuck out to me, is 49% favor keeping funding about the same, and 23% say the state should reduce funding.
23%, 1 in 4. That's pretty sizable.
Yes.
And then what was the number for?
Almost half, 49%.
Wow. Okay.
So that's
UW, wake up.
Yeah, that's almost 3 out of every 4 voters think that there's too much money or the right amount of money going to UW, but only 26% say that more money should go to UW now.
So it's not even a majority of Democrats.
No.
Well, I mean, we'd have to look at the crosstabs, but one could make an assumption that not even half of Democrats are supportive of that, which, frankly, it's a paradigm shift if true. And UW system, you're on borrowed time. K-12, you still got some time left, but UW system, get with the times. What are you doing?
Yep. But that's just a snippet of what we took away from the Marquette Law Poll. We'll link in the show notes to the full breakdown of the poll via Twitter or via X that they do. Always interesting to see. It's always a very charged day when you have a Marquette Law Poll come out.
There's always a lot of hot takes that come out, and I'm so here for it. One thing I did want to mention regarding the law poll before we move on was 56% of voters favor deporting immigrants in the U.S. illegally, while 43% opposed deportations. In February, 61% favored deportations. So it's actually fallen a little bit, but it's still well above water. I had totally forgotten, too, that it was at 61%.
Some of that,
which is insane,
has to be manipulated by the press.
Yeah, there's probably a little bit of it. I mean, we have talked about some of the stories that have happened in Wisconsin where people have gotten deported and they had to take their children with them, or they got to take their children with them. And so there's been a lot of emotional manipulation, but I have to imagine if that emotional manipulation had happened 4 or 5 years ago, that number might be well above or well below water. So the fact that it's still at 56%, and on a slightly different note, we've talked about the surplus a number of times.
Yes.
And they had polled about the surplus, saying Wisconsin voters support using at least some of the roughly $4 billion state surplus for tax cuts. Asked what percentage of the surplus should be used for tax cuts, 65% say half or more, including 27% that said that all should go to tax cuts.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's the money that the citizens of the state of Wisconsin pay to the state. There's extra that should come back.
Oh, 100%. So 65%, I'm sure the Evers administration reads that too, and it's like, well, if I'm going to run for re-election, I'll probably have to do something.
Going to have to do some sort of income tax
have to
cut.
do something.
Yep. Some property tax relief.
We'll see what the Democrats.
Yep.
Are they going to absolutely, sneer and say to veto the budget just because it has those tax cuts? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting law poll.
One last thing out of the law poll, and another topic that I think if we get a slow time, we can break down a bit further. I'm happy to share my thoughts on this one, but 67% of Wisconsin registered voters favor legalizing marijuana, with 33% oppose. That would mean that there's a good percentage of Republicans in that favor legalization, as well as, of course, independents, and I'm sure 98% of Democrats.
Well, unfortunately, they're all wrong. I am not in agreement with this. I don't care. The libertarians probably out there. I have friends with I'm friends with some more libertarians or right-leaning libertarians. Sorry, I don't like it. I don't want to walk outside and have to smell pot just outside. I smell skunks enough when I'm going up north and I run them over, but I don't need to smell them when I'm out and about. Or especially, not that I go in Milwaukee County all that much because I don't like to drive down there for reasons everyone understands. But I just don't want to smell pot. Sorry.
I remember walking into the Pfizer Forum, and for about 3 blocks around it, it's all you could smell. And that's ridiculous.
That whole area's changed. I don't go down there anymore.
We're going to have to. I don't go down there now, but that's because I'm too old to be down there.
That's fair.
But we'll get into that more. I think we'd have a fun discussion then. We'd have a fun discussion.
I would love. I am all for talking about it. I love a friendly debate about the merits or the demerits of it. But last thing, I swear it'll be the last thing. But I can't remember. And forgive me if you said this already, but maybe you didn't. Discussing where Wisconsin currently ranks in public funding of our universities. Mm-hmm. Did you mention that?
I didn't.
Okay, so I thought this one was, if we're talking about the education ones, was the most fascinating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because they prefaced the question was, when told that, quote, Wisconsin currently ranks 44th out of 50 states in public funding for 4-year state universities and has recently closed several 2-year campuses, 41% say funding should be increased. So even with the information that they're trying to set the premise, I actually applaud Marquette for doing this because just to see like the slant where they're framing it like, oh, we don't fund our public universities adequately, meaning we should slant them into saying, oh, we should fund them. Even with all of that information, only 41 said give them more money.
That's wild.
Which is, I think, is insane. We should run to the hills with that data point right there, because the Democrats, I've seen a few Democrats throw that around. 44 out of 50, 44 out of 50, 44 out of 50. We're so bad. We don't fund our universities, yada, yada, yada. And then and they did a poll and they could barely scrape 40%.
Well, again, something we're going to have to explore more, but as we talked about in our prior episode, like the way they're funding it is inefficient. What they're doing right now, having 5,000 additional bureaucrats and 7 2-year campuses, people are probably thinking that's not the best way to be using the funds that they're giving. So we'll put the Marquette Law Poll in our show notes. You'll have to check that out. Send us your feedback. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you think we missed or what we got wrong. We're happy to talk about it more. But right now, let's look at Wisconsin's congressman from the 2nd District.
Disgrace.
An absolute disgrace. In Mark Pocan.
Well, he's not always in the news all that much unless he's attacking Derek Van Orden or he's holding town halls in Derek Van Orden's district because, God forbid he do anything in his own district. I'm pretty sure that Mark Pocan is basically just a paid op for the DCCC or Democrat Committee, whatever.
Congressional Campaign Committee.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure he just works full time for them because all he does especially on Twitter, is just harass Derek Van Orden. And to be fair, DVO dishes it out back a lot. And you can definitely tell of all the congressmen that have control of their own Twitter, DVO has it, as well as Mark Pocan. Mark Pocan's in a not blood red, or a deep blue Democratic district, and DVO is in a very 50-50 purple district, so maybe DVO shouldn't. But Mark Pocan, leave it to the Hamas sympathizer himself to go out on a limb and attack one of the Trump administration's chief cabinet people for being Jewish, apparently.
Yep. So he told Stephen Miller in a tweet, I'm going to read it right now. He called him after Stephen Miller tweeted, NYC is the clearest warning yet of what happens to a society when it fails to control migration. Mark Pocan's response was, racist fuck, go back to 1930s Germany. Now, tell me you hate Jews without telling me you hate Jews.
And of course, he doesn't delete the tweet. He doesn't roll it back. In fact, he's just like, well, guys, he's being a Nazi, therefore I'm just calling him a Nazi. Well, I don't know, Mark. Maybe you should have read the room before you said, here's this Jewish guy. Go back to Germany when it was probably a little precarious to be a Jewish person back in the day. But
little precarious.
Just a little precarious. I'm not going out on a limb or anything. I'm just, stating some obvious facts I think we all understand. But the NRCC, they did a little story on this situation, which, of course, again, he has not walked back. He's barely even addressed it. And in fact, I did think it was interesting. There was a reporter that talked about this, and to be fair, there was a few reporters that picked up this story, but it wasn't like overwhelming, I would say. I think they all had like a little, I don't want to say a throwaway story, but
sure.
it did make national news, and there were a few people that were asking for comments, at least from the local news. And I think there's a Jewish reporter. I can't remember. I want to say, hold on. I think I could probably find him just on the fly, but I believe it was Alexander Schur.
Sure. Alexandra.
I thought it was Alexander. I can't find him on Twitter right now, but I believe he's Jewish. And Mark Pocan was going back to him and like criticizing him for, shouldn't you know better that this is just like right-wing talking points or whatever that you're dragging up. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? So truly an unhinged individual. And I think even if the Democrats are listening right now, or whatever Democrats are listening now, would probably agree that at the very least, he should walk it back and say, hey, maybe I used my words incorrectly. I apologize. It's not a big deal. I mean, I think saying sorry for that was the bare minimum, because if we can't even acknowledge that, I mean, boy.
So Larry Andrea of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel did cover this story, but of course in the most repugnant bullshit fashion, which is Republicans slam Mark Pocan for social media post about White House aide Stephen Miller. Of course it's not about Mark Pocan being a repugnant anti-Semite. It's about Republicans being the bad guys.
Republicans pounce.
Exactly. And that is such a bullshit way for the Journal-Sentinel and left-wing newspapers to say, yeah, of course we covered the story. Republicans can no longer complain that the Democrats in the Democrat press aren't covering stories, because now they can say, well, we covered it. Of course we wrote about it. It's Republicans pounce.
But of course the headline, I mean, most people only read the headline. So they see the headline and they move on with their day, or they go to the next headline, and, and maybe they read the opinion section, and then that's that. So it'd be nice if the media, I'm not saying you have to be a right-wing hack, but maybe throw us a bone every once in a while. I mean, for God's sake, Mark Pocan isn't going to lose an election. The dude is going to die in office, and then the primary for that seat is going to be incredible.
Oh, the amount of libs just shanking each
I'm
other.
going to tell you one thing: the Madison is going to elect an insufferable white woman. It's the quintessential
just a
Madison voter.
A deranged woke white woman, or
Yeah,
an
it's
affluent white female liberal, just an awful person.
It's just going to be the Akelda Roy's, Melissa Agard, and then there's the new state senator that I think has trans kids, and it's going to be that's going to be.
You're not going to put Frankie Hong in that one too?
Oh well, but she's in the assembly.
Oh, she can make that.
Francesca Hong, or the the area that represents the Capitol. Mm-hmm. I'm sure she would run but she could run for state senate then. She wouldn't have to give up her seat, if in the assembly. So that primary will be an extremely, extremely degenerate primary. But everyone will be, the trans stuff will be running wild, I'm sure, and will be fascinating to watch. But
the DEI checks that those candidates are going to have to pace. But no, in this case with Mark Pocan, like just the fact that he hasn't been called on. He has been called by Republicans to apologize, and of course he hasn't. And of course, since the left-wing media won't do their job and cover the story, like if a Republican said anything like this,
oh God,
every Republican in the state of Wisconsin and nationally would
have
be forced,
to denounce it.
Exactly. But since it's a Democrat and since it's an anti-Semitic comment,
it's like
it's a free pass.
Here, there, gone tomorrow. Because it's a nothing burger,
right? Because the Democratic Party has a constituency with Hamas, and of course that means that the left-wing media has to play up to the Hamas angle and not and ignore the anti-Semitism that came from this.
Yeah, it's not surprising coming from Mark Pocan, but maybe if he was in a closer district, maybe it'd be a story. I doubt it. I'm trying to give as much credit. I'm trying to give as much leniency to the media, which I shouldn't be giving, as I possibly can.
But this is the only way this would be a story at a higher level amongst the mainstream media would be if it was a Republican that did it. That's the only way.
Agreed.
So with that, we got to have a little bit of candy to leave you guys with as we come out of this 4th of July weekend.
A little palate cleanser.
Yes. And for a palate cleanser, I want to first talk about, we've talked about food on this podcast a lot so far. The Milwaukee Record did a taste test of the Miller branded Pringles and Miller branded Bar Nut Mix by Planters recently. I went to the store and looked for the Miller Lite partnered Pringles, was unable to find them. So brand collaborations are all the rage this day. So let's look at what they thought of the 3 options from Pringles that they have is a beer braised steak Pringle.
Okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah, so I love steak. It's delicious
in a Pringle form.
But I've never really
great for the barbecue.
I've never encountered a beer braised steak.
I'm kind of a traditional guy where I like my salt, pepper, put it on the steak, and that's my only seasoning. I have done some marinades, but I think I just always go back to just the regular salt and pepper.
Not a Montreal steak seasoning type guy?
I mean, yeah, but I'm just more of a salt, pepper, cook it to perfection, and that's all you need to do. Especially with the nicer cuts of steak, the more expensive ones. If I'm getting like a cheaper steak, I can maybe experiment a little bit, try something out.
So you get a 1-inch thick top sirloin, salt, pepper. Let it sit for 10-15 minutes until it gets to room temperature. Salt and pepper heavily. Grill at 400, 4 minutes total. Flip each minute to get the good grill marks. Let it sit for 2 minutes and down the hatch, right?
Perfect.
Well, the verdict on the beer braised steak Pringles was that the flavor was lacking apart from a very slight mushroomy tinge, which is maybe a near-miss attempt to replicate beef.
Okay. That's not invoking confidence.
Not invoking confidence. So, to paraphrase a ancient Wendy's reference, where's the steak? Where's the beer? But the guys at Milwaukee Record gave it a very light, yeah, sure. So on to the next one.
I would try it. I'm sure I'd try it.
Of course. Got to try it. But Pringles Miller Lite Beer Can Chicken Potato Crisps.
Okay, there's a little too many words in there.
But
I'm sorry.
I love a beer can chicken. Do you ever done a beer can chicken? You ever
I
got a tall boy? And
yep. Oh, I know. I don't think I've actually ever had one, though.
Oh, you got to do it.
I should. Oh, yeah, I should definitely try it.
But get a tall boy. You work in that chicken. You give it the business. You get it up there, and you just stick a potato in the neck hole, and just let it cook.
I mean, you have your drink, you have your food. It's a one-stop shop. It's summertime. I should do as much grilling as humanly possible. So I'll have to do that.
But in this case, the fellas at Milwaukee Records said you could detect a slight hint of chicken, but not much.
Yeah.
I call it the touched by a chicken in a biscuit assessment, which they say should be premiering on CBS this fall. But they gave it the yeah, no, but yeah rating, or yeah, sure. In the I'll eat them anyways sort of thoughts. But the final one they gave for the Pringles Miller Lite Grilled Beer Brat Potato Crisps.
Interesting. Good stuff. I mean, again, I would try it again.
Do you grill your brat? Do you beer braise your brats? You soak them in the beer with some onions?
It depends on how much time I have. Mm-hmm. Most of the time I will. I actually have that's my Drexel, that's my brat soaking beer up there.
Nice.
But yeah, onions, put that in there. I love it. I love the beer soaked brats.
So this is the one that the fellas here said is the collaboration they were looking for. They Frankensteined a legitimately accurate potato chip rendition of a grilled beer brat. Seasoning was more pronounced and detected hints of onion powder and underlying grilled sausage flavor.
Okay, so they cooked with this one.
Yes, so this is the robust, yummy, and flavor-accurate kind of unnerving Jelly Belly way. You could actually see the powder for once. So thumbs up on that one. Those are emphatic, oh yeah. Finally, the Planters and Miller High Life Bar Nut Mix. I'm a High Life guy. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. The only beer I really drink is Miller and Miller High Life. I haven't strayed much in a couple of years now.
Not a double-barreled bourbon stout or a juicy fruit IPA.
I am very boring, very run-of-the-mill. You start getting into hoppy this, hoppy that, and I'm like, no, I can't do it. I'm sorry. I used to drink lots of Budweiser, and then they went gay, so it's been Miller ever since.
Yeah, so for me, I'm a Miller guy. I'm a Liney's Light or Liney's Original, fully leaded guy.
Summer Shandy, just basically all the time. I'll drink Summer Shandy 365.
Yeah, I like
any day of the year.
I like my normie beers, my pilsners, my cream ales.
See,
my lighter stuff.
You're even going into. I mean, I'm not even there. I just Miller Lite. I'll be the guy that goes to the craft brewery house. We'll look at the menu, look at the 50 beers on tap, and be like, "Can I get a Miller Lite, please?"
Oh, at least drink the local pills.
Well, okay,
the local amber.
I'll try like one thing. I probably won't like. I do enjoy the Oktoberfest beers.
Sure,
I love the German beers.
Oh yeah.
So I will experiment with those probably the most. But other than that, Old Faithful doesn't disappoint. The 97 calories of Miller Lite never disappoint.
Well, the Tyler and Matt from from Milwaukee Record say that it's hard to go wrong with an assortment of crunchy, savory, and peppery flaked ingredients. However, it should be mentioned that the tie-in comes from the suggestion that to enjoy the bar nut mix with a cold High Life. So there's no actual overlap of flavors on this one, but I do like me some bar nuts, some beer nuts.
Of course.
Maybe some Dots pretzels. So
sign me up.
Throw these Planters into the mix. Have myself a Miller High Life.
And of course, we're talking about this all after the 4th of July.
We are, but we did hit them with the PS seasoning, Jolly Good collab. I think next time we get on this, I think I'm going to find us those Pringle Miller Lite grilled beer brought potato crisps for us to enjoy. Maybe with some
in studio
yes.
on the mic, just crunching.
Yes. So this will be our next episode. Will be half political talk, half
ASMR.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with that, folks,
quick recommendation.
Yes.
We were talking about recommendations. I know we just talked a lot about food, but I have to give a shout out.
Go for it.
While we're talking about all this very Americana food, what better way to honor the 4th of July and the 4th of July culinary traditions than giving a shout out to Rodizio's Steakhouse, or Brazilian Steakhouse.
Not a sponsor.
Sounds
good. I've never had it. Tell me more.
It is fantastic. It is. If at the very least you need to go just for the optics. It's just it's a fun experience. It's very fast paced. To those that don't know, there's one in Milwaukee. It's a chain though. They're all over the country, I'm pretty sure. I've been to one outside the state as well. But it's very simple. You get there. I think there's a salad bar there as well. But you take this little red and green totem, and when you want food, you just flip it to green. And when you flip it to green, they just barrage you. Hey, you want this you want this chicken, you want this steak, and they just keep on lambasting you. And they just cut it. They get this big sword, and the meat is on the sword. And they'll just be like, hey, how much do you want? And they'll just start cutting it until you're ready to stop. And then when you're done, you flip it to red, you eat your meat. And then when you're all done and you want some more, you just flip it again. And you just repeat the process until you're stuffed to the gills. It's just so good. It's incredible. And 5 stars just for the atmosphere alone. And then, of course, the food is top-notch as well.
Well, I can't wait to actually give this a try now. Never had it. Sounds delicious.
Have to try it.
I like meat. I like swords. That's really cute.
I don't think it's an actual sword, but all I know is they carry it around and the meat is in the middle of it. So it's a sword in my book.
Well, that's a great recommendation. Folks, if you haven't quite figured it out yet, we cut this episode before the 4th of July. I know it's a weird time and there's a lot going on. We're going to be looking forward to getting back to it next week. We'll talk about the budget. We'll talk about all the other stuff that's probably going to go crazy. And
next week's going to be wild.
And light up Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into it. And hopefully, as we get closer to the end of the Supreme Court term, we'll talk about all the cases that come out of there. And we can even maybe have a couple long-form debates coming up. So
we'll have to have some legal scholars on.
So we got some great stuff coming up for you. Can't wait to get it for you. So this is a wrap on this one. I'm your host, Justin Phillips.
Shadow Governor Voss.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Show notes can be found at our Substack, newfashionconservatives.substack.com. Make sure to sign up there so you are the first to be alerted to any of our new content. Follow us on X at New Fashion Pod, Facebook, Rumble, True Social at New Fashion Conservatives. Send us memes, feedback, hate mail, whatever you got, questions to newfashionpod@gmail.com. And with that, we're out.